With the upcoming parliamentary elections in Iraq just a week away, I thought I'd check back into the region and see if I could come to any conclusions about the outcome or what the impact may be. After taking a look at the data, it's clear from public opinion that the current government is failing to meet the expectations of most Iraqis, but the system may not be flexible enough for real change to come this election. Nevertheless, there are a few surprising political trends occurring in Iraq right now that could potentially shake up the governing coalition on election day. The country's position and resource wealth means that the results are of interest to both regional powers like Iran and Saudi Arabia, as well as more global hegemonic powers. So these elections are worth looking at both if you're interested in the domestic policy of Iraq or in the geopolitics of the Middle East. First, I thought I'd bring everyone up to speed with Iraq's political system, which merits some historical context. So, the modern nation of Iraq was created from the remnants of the Ottoman Empire with a League of Nations mandate in 1920, following World War I, and it was administered by the British. Prior to this, the area that would become Iraq was by no means a nation. Rather, it was composed of various ethno-religious groups, whose interplay still dominates Iraqi politics to this day. Almost 80% of Iraqis are Arab, while some 15 to 20 are Kurds, a distinct ethnic group with its own language, history, and culture, concentrated in northern Iraq, eastern Turkey, northeastern Syria, and western Iran. Assyrians, Iraqi Turkmen, and other smaller minorities like Mandeans, Armenians, Circassians, Iranians, Shabaks, and Yazidis make up the remaining 5 to 10% of the population. The Arab population itself is also far from united, chiefly due to religious and cultural differences. About 60% of Arab Muslims in Iraq are Shia, concentrated in the southeast, and around 35% are Sunni, a more tribal minority from the western regions, which historically ruled over the Shia majority. Iraq became an independent kingdom in 1932, ruled by the Hashemite dynasty, one which claims descent from the Prophet, and was given the crowns of both Iraq and Jordan by the British. The kingdom lasted until 1958, when Faisal II was overthrown in a socialist coup by General al-Karim Qasim, who aligned Iraq with the Soviet Union, redistributed land, and promoted a civic Iraqi nationalism that recognized Iraq's Arabs and Kurds as equal parties in the state. However, by cutting Iraq off from the rest of the Arab world, Qasim provoked numerous coup attempts, and eventually the Ba'ath Party rose to power in 1968 with the help of the military. Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr became the first president of Ba'athist Iraq, but the movement gradually came under the control of Saddam Hussein, who acceded to the presidency and control of the Revolutionary Command Council, Iraq's supreme executive body, in 1979. First thing on Saddam's agenda was to go to war. Capitalizing on the perceived instability of its eastern neighbor Iran following its Islamic Revolution, Iraq declared war hoping to annex their claims and to prevent against a rebellion by its own Shia population. The war dragged on for 8 years, costing the lives of between 500,000 and 1.5 million people, including tens of thousands of Kurds in a targeted genocidal campaign that I've covered before on this channel. The war ended in a stalemate in 1988, but Saddam hadn't learned his lesson, invading and annexing his smaller neighbor, Kuwait, in 1991. This led to a military intervention by the United States-led forces in the First Gulf War. Iraq was defeated decisively, going home with strict sanctions and a ravaged military. Seeing an opportunity, Shia and Kurdish Iraqis led several uprisings against Saddam Hussein's regime, but these were successfully repressed by the Iraqi security forces and chemical weapons. During the uprisings, the US, UK, France, and Turkey established no-fly zones in Iraq to protect Kurdish and Shia populations from attacks by the Saddam regime. It's estimated that as many as 100,000 people were killed in quashing the uprisings. Iraq was ordered to destroy its chemical and biological weapons, and the UN attempted to compel Saddam's government to disarm and agree to a ceasefire by imposing even more sanctions on the country, adding to the sanctions imposed following Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The Iraqi government's failure to disarm and agree to a ceasefire resulted in further sanctions. On October of 2002, the US Congress passed a joint resolution to authorize the use of United States armed forces against Iraq. In November of 2002, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1441, and in March of 2003, the US and its allies invaded Iraq under the pretext that it had failed to abandon its weapons of mass destruction program, in violation of UN Resolution 687. This claim was based on documents provided by the CIA and the British government, but were later found to be unreliable. No weapons of mass destruction were found, but the Saddam regime was toppled and replaced with the Coalition Provisional Authority. Under CPA executive Paul Bremer, Iraq underwent a process of de-Baathification. Members of the former regime were excluded from holding government office, and the largely Baathist Sunni military was disbanded. The post-invasion climate quickly descended into chaos. First, Sunni jihadist groups, including the former Iraqi secret police and army personnel, began an insurgency against the coalition forces. One of these groups was Jama'at al-Tawheed wal-Jihad, which would later become Al-Qaeda in Iraq and ultimately Islamic State. Concurrently, Shia militia began to form, such as the Mahdi army formed by cleric Muqtada as-Sadr. By 2004, Sunni and Shia insurgents were targeting each other in a fierce sectarian conflict. It was against this backdrop that the new constitution was created, and the first election since the invasion took place, in 2005. The Constitution of Iraq established the state as a federal parliamentary Islamic republic. The president, who serves for 4-year terms in a largely ceremonial role, calls upon the leading party in legislative elections, which also occur every 4 years, to form a government. The government consists of the premier and the cabinet, which, in turn, must seek approval from the Council of Representatives, or Majlis al-Nuwab, to assume power. Iraq is divided for administrative purposes into 18 muhaffazat, or governorates, which, while they're technically federated states, only the 3 in the northeast that constitute the Kurdistan region have real self-rule, a special degree of autonomy which the Kurds won with Western assistance in the 1991 Gulf War. In the elections of 2005, the Shia United Iraqi Alliance won a majority of seats, and Ibrahim al-Jafari of Hizb al-Da'wa al-Islamiyya narrowly beat out Adel Abdul Mahdi of the Iranian-aligned party for the premiership by just 1 vote, thanks to the support of as-Sadr and his Sadrist movement. The sectarian violence continued, and al-Jafari became increasingly associated with the failure to end the violence and to improve services. Members of the United Iraqi Alliance conspired with Sunni and Kurdish politicians to convince Western leaders to pressure him into resigning, and Nouri al-Maliki, also of the Da'wa party, became the next premier. Despite the new government of national unity, violence continued, exacerbated by the execution of Saddam Hussein, which further angered Sunnis. Al-Maliki's government agreed to a surge of U.S. troops in Iraq in 2007 to quell the violence, but called on the U.S. to set a timetable for ultimately withdrawing the troops. The Status of Forces Agreement was signed in 2008, which required U.S. forces to withdraw from Iraqi cities by the 30th of June 2009 and to withdraw completely from Iraq by the end of 2011. Another election was held in 2010, in which Ayad al-Lawi's party, the secular and mostly Sunni-backed al-Iraqiyya list, won a slim plurality closely trailed by al-Maliki's list, I'tilaf Dawlat al-Qanun. The result occurred after many parties associated with the Shia militia broke with al-Maliki when he struck a deal with the Sadrists. After 5 months of fraught negotiations, the head of the Iranian Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, brokered an agreement of the formation of a new government where al-Maliki would continue as premier. Then it went from bad to worse. The withdrawal of U.S. troops, the Arab Spring, and the Syrian civil war all galvanized Sunni extremists to step up their insurgency in an attempt to undermine confidence in the al-Maliki-led government. This all came to head in 2014 when the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant seized control of large swaths of land, including several major Iraqi cities like Tikrit, Fallujah, and Mosul. The elections of 2014 saw a very small increase in seats for I'tilaf Dawlat al-Qanun, but al-Maliki's inability to hold the country together led to his dismissal, and Haider al-Abadi, still of the Da'wa party, was tasked with forming a new government. In a slow campaign, Iraq was able to push Daesh completely out of the country by December of 2007. The Kurdish regional government's Peshmerga forces captured a significant amount of territory back from Daesh, including the oil fields around Kirkuk, motivating the regional president Masoud Barzani to push through an independence referendum in September of 2017, where 92% of the population voted in favor of independence from Iraq. However, Al-Abadi deemed the referendum illegal, and Iraqi forces recaptured Kirkuk and other Iraqi land outside of the Kurdistan region, after which Barzani stepped down as president. Coalitions were required to register for the coming elections by January 11th of 2018. Members of the Council of Representatives are elected through the open list form of party list proportional representation, using the 18 governorates of Iraq as constituencies. This means that you vote for a party list on the ballot rather than a candidate, and seats are distributed according to the proportion of votes each list receives in each governorate. The total seats available in each of the governorates is shown on this table, with 8 seats reserved for minority groups at the national level. 5 for Christians and 1 each for Mandeans who inhabit the southern floodplains, Yazidis in the area around Sinjar and Nineveh, and the Shabaks, just to the east of Mosul. So what's changed since the 2014 elections? Well, the biggest thing is that sectarian divisions have become much less cut and dry across all groups in Iraq. Among the Shia, divisions emerged as early as the 2013 local elections in southern Iraq, but Al-Maliki's support has continued to wane since then due to the damaging impact of his sectarian political agenda. People seem to have woken up to the fact that calling for violence against your outgroup eventually leads to reprisals. Al-Abadi has also avoided sectarian rhetoric on purpose, and also much of the political muckraking surrounding the election against his Sunni counterparts. Instead, he's capitalized primarily on his government's victory over Daesh, going so far as to name his list Itilaf al-Nasr, or Coalition of Victory. With the end of the fighting, many Shia militia have also laid down their weapons in favor of politics, creating the Itilaf al-Fath, or Coalition of Conquest. Its main components are former groups involved in the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the Popular Mobilization Forces, which were mostly Shiite Arabs who fought alongside the Iraqi army to defeat Daesh. It's led by Hadi al-Amiri, the leader of the Badr organization. Lastly, from the Shia camp, the influential cleric Muqtada al-Sadr has formed Sa'irun, or On the Move, a coalition with, strangely, the Iraqi Communist Party to contest this year's elections. This is seemingly an attempt to appeal to the entirety of the poor sectors of the country, both secular and Shia, with a populist message. This emergence of more pragmatic alliances means that a Shia united front which relies solely on the majority demographic, as envisioned by Al-Maliki, will probably not be the path to power this year. Similarly, on the Sunni side, support for Vice President Usama al-Mujafi's Al-Mutahidun coalition has collapsed, meaning that there will be a number of Sunni parties vying for support this election. In Kurdistan, the two main parties, the conservative Kurdistan Democratic Party and the Socialist Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, have joined forces as a Kurdish list to punch back following the defeat of the 2017 referendum. However, even in Kurdistan, a new guard of Islamist and secular Kurdish politicians are gaining ground. I want to quickly go through some data which indicate the level of stability in Iraq right now, or rather lack thereof, and shed some light on what issues the people have in their minds as they head to the polls. First is just the impact of almost 15 years of war that Iraq has suffered through. About 200,000 people have died from the conflict as of 2017. Another 280,000 have left the country as refugees, and those that have remained are in dire need of services, especially in places that have been cut off from the central government during the Daesh occupation. As a result, there are many medical, education, and food security issues, and the country has missed out on about $150 million in GDP due to the war. The state has seen its capacity decrease significantly, and is seen by the populace as woefully ineffective at maintaining sovereignty and regulating the economy. While the violence has subsided, rule of law has yet to be asserted, and corruption is rampant in what seems like an extremely arbitrary and self-serving government. Just taking a look at Iraq's GDP per capita shows that the general public are certainly not benefiting from the country's oil wealth, rather that it's the politicians who are siphoning the profits away. In fact, Iraq has an extremely corrupt and bloated public sector, with almost 60% of the annual budget going to salaries for government employees, but one of the lowest outputs of government services in the entire region. And lastly, Iraq has population pressures that shouldn't be understated, some of the worst in the region. The post-Gulf War baby boom resulted in a population of around 40 million, 7.7 times the number of Iraqis in 1950. This has led to a real unemployment rate of over 40% in youth. That is, a combination of those who are unemployed, underemployed, and marginally attached to the workforce. The government's feeling the pressure of this growing population in need of social services, and they're struggling to provide them with the current levels of devastation. So now we'll finally get into some polling data, and look forward to the 2018 election. The data I'll show will be divided into categories by governorate and by the type of party that people are voting for. So here, firstly, are all the governorates of Iraq, and I've grouped them by the predominant demographic living there. The Sunni governorates of Nineveh, Salah al-Din, and Anbar can be seen in red. The 9 Shia governorates are to the south in green, and the blue governorates of Baghdad, Diyala, and Kirkuk are where ethnicities have a relatively even distribution, and of course in gold are the governorates within the Kurdistan region. When I refer to parties by secular, Islamist, or mixed, I'm just referring to the general policies and the general voting blocks. Secular parties are relatively minimal. Islamist parties have been kind of the dominant party that people vote for, and we're seeing a rise of parties that run mixed religious fundamentalist candidates and secular candidates. So if you look at the focus groups from the 2014 exit polls, there's no real difference on who people vote for based on their age bracket. It's a relatively even distribution for all the different types of parties based on what age you are. And with education level, you see a bit of a change, with typically the less educated someone is, the more they'll vote for an Islamist party, and as their education goes up, the more they'll vote for a secular party. But this isn't the greatest data because not very many Iraqis are postgraduate, and those who do sometimes are abroad and don't vote. So basically, based off of your age or education level, it'll be difficult to tell sort of what kind of party you vote for. More noteworthy is along ethno-religious lines. The biggest division of who votes for an Islamist party is not age or education level, but rather your religious sect, in particular the sect of Islam which you follow. So in the last election, 93% of Shia Muslims voted for an Islamist party, while only 6% of Sunni Muslims voted for this sort of party, instead voting for a mixed or a secular party. And I mean, this makes sense given that the majority of the country are Shia. So historically, these sort of parties and these sort of clerics could rely merely on numbers to get the vote out. And Sunnis had to resort to more mixed parties or secular parties to try to get their voices heard and get representation. Moving on to people's actual voting intentions, the first question was basically, do you intend to vote in the upcoming parliamentary elections? And the turnout, as you can see, is highest among Sunnis and Kurds, as more marginalized groups. And it's really good that the total turnout is so high. But given historical turnout in Iraqi elections, chances are no more than 40% will really vote. So you have to wonder why people aren't voting. And the biggest reason for boycotting the election is that people don't trust the system. And this is mostly the same overall demographics. A lot of people think that there's really no point in doing the elections, and nothing really will change. Also that candidates mind their own interests only, and a small amount of people think that the elections are fixed, or that it's not really worth voicing their opinions because we already know what's going to happen. And then here are what people responded to for their most important factor in considering what candidate they'll choose. Integrity of candidates is very important across most groups, given that corruption is so blatant and awful in Iraq. Second is jobs. Jobs are always important. Economy is going to be an important voting issue, regardless of what country you are. And it's noteworthy that the Kurds don't really care that much about the integrity, rather for things like jobs and for their rights. There's clearly anger, the fallout of the 2017 referendum getting shot down by the incumbent. So with people's voting intentions in mind, now we can talk about the expected results of these elections. So what you see here is a result of the question, regardless of if you plan to vote or not, which list would you vote for? Now, the polling institution that asked this question did another poll only of people who said they intended to vote or were certainly going to vote, and any sort of change was pretty negligible. So we're going to go off of this in determining the seats. So I'm going to quickly run through the main lists in order of their projected votes. So it's pretty clear that the Shia coalition, formerly hegemonic, has pretty much collapsed completely. In first place is Itilaf al-Nasr, al-Abadi's coalition. Second is Itilaf al-Fatha, the army of conquest composed of the Shia militia. Third place is Sa'irun, the clerical and communist list. And in fourth place comes Al-Maliki's list, Itilaf Dawlat al-Qanun. In fifth place, you have a non-Shia party popping up with the Kurdish list, composed of the two biggest Kurdish parties. And then in sixth place, we have Itilaf al-Wat'aniya, the mixed, more secular party. Then comes the second Kurdish list, composed of the Coalition for Democracy and Justice, Goran, and Komal, an Islamic party. Next is Tayyar al-Hikma al-Watani, which was an offshoot of al-Maliki's list that joined with the more grassroots militia. Then we have another small Kurdish party, Nwe Nwe, or New Generation. And then we have another small Kurdish party, Yakirtu, another Islamist union. And then the two smallest parties are Tilaf al-Qarar and ائتلاف العربية. So all of these parties have relatively the same domestic program. They just want to fix all of the chaos. There are some minor differences in how they go about doing this, but history suggests that none of them will be particularly sincere, and even if they are, the differences are relatively limited, and it's unclear whether or not they'll even be able to implement any parts of their program. The other alternative is to go along sectarian lines, but there are some key divisions, namely in foreign policy, specifically relations towards Iran. So here's the breakdown of the expected power map with pro-Iranian parties and anti-Iranian parties. In the pro-Iran camp, you have Al-Fatah, the militia, which makes sense given that while they were part of the Iraqi government, they were also funded in large part by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and also the State of Law, Al-Maliki's party. In the soft pro-Iranian side, you have Al-Hikmah, the offshoot of the State of Law, small parts of Abadi's coalition, and the traditional parties from the Kurdistan region, the PUK and the KDP. The larger group is composed of the anti-Iranian parties. So this is the majority of Al-Nasr, the Sadrists, the opposition coalition in the Kurdish region, as well as the smaller Kurdish party New Generation, and the hard-con Iranian parties, Al-Alawi's party, Al-Wataniya, Al-Qarar, the Sunni party, and the smaller Sunni parties. Here's what I think Parliament will look like after elections, and while a lot of it is guesswork, I have some pretty good reasons for why I'm saying this. So, chances are the Prime Minister will stay the same, Abadi. Abadi will probably win another mandate, and he'll be able to determine what the government looks like. Now, in order to do this, he'll have to sideline traditional allies of his, like the pro-Iran Shia parties of Al-Fatah and State of Law. He's also going to have to leave out the biggest Kurdish parties, given that he nullified the referendum results in favor of some new faces in the Nishtiman coalition, like Guran and the KIG, as well as the New Generation. This leaves Abadi, the secular and mixed parties, as well as the new Kurdish parties, in the governing coalition. If this is the coalition that forms, Abadi is really the only logical choice for Prime Minister. You would need someone who's Shia to appeal to the now ostracized Shia population again, but who has a broad base of support from Sunnis, which we'll later see Abadi has. And there really are no new Kurdish faces that have enough clout to really pose any threat to Abadi's reign. You're probably going to see a continuation of the Abadi premiership for the foreseeable future, and a shift away from Iran foreign policy-wise as the country rebuilds, given that many of these factions are the ones excluded from this grand coalition that is likely to form. This result can be attributed to two political trends in the country right now. One is that sectarian voting is changing significantly in Sunni areas. Parties that previously voted only for Sunni candidates now have flocked en masse to Abadi, after he portrayed himself as the hero who freed them from the occupation under Daesh. The second change is a burgeoning liberal opposition in the Kurdish regions, with many young voters sick and tired of the traditional conservative socialist dichotomy, and are instead voting for a new guard of Kurdish politicians that are willing to align themselves with the Abadi coalition, even though he nullified the referendum results. It's clear from trends that the Iraqi political culture is changing drastically. Both purely Islamist and purely secular movements have seen a marked decrease in recent years, with mixed and minority parties filling the void. No longer are people just voting along sectarian lines, rather they're making clearly informed decisions, in some cases even ideological decisions, about who they vote for, rather than just supporting their in-group. Still, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, chances are that we're going to see the same faces in government. Al-Abadi will probably continue as Prime Minister for the next 4 years, and it's unclear if the Iraqi people will react positively to this continued stability, or if they'll start to feel fed up with a system that won't change to their demands. And that's something that I definitely can't predict. Thanks for watching.